Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. Días. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes just to make sure everybody has a chance to join in. So bear with us for a couple of minutes. And we're just giving it one more minute. People are still joining in, and we want to make sure everybody has a chance to join the conversation. So it'll be one more minute. All right, and I think we are ready to go. On behalf of Acacia Network and IPRE, we want to welcome everyone today for our Friday Wellness Session. Happy Friday, everyone. Feliz viernes a todo el mundo. Gracias por unirse a esta conversación, a nuestra presentación del viernes. Today we have a very special presentation and a very special guest. We are going to be talking about COVID-19 and the newly approved COVID-19 vaccine and other related subjects. We have with us Dr. Daniel Rosa. Dr. Rosa is a senior medical director at Acacia Network. He's been with the organization since 2008. Dr. Rosa is also presently serving as an attending physician in emergency medicine for the VA healthcare system. You know, he's been working in this field for a very, very, very long time. He is certainly an important part of our clinical team, and we are so happy that he's able to join us today to join his medical and clinical expertise with all of you. Queremos darle la bienvenida a nuestro panelista de hoy, el doctor Daniel Rosa. El doctor Rosa es un director médico senior en Acacia Network. También trabaja en sala de emergencias y tiene mucha experiencia, no solo en el campo clínico y en el manejo de emergencias, sino también él ha estado en los front lines desde el principio, manejando la pandemia del COVID-19. Así que estamos muy contentos de que él va a estar con nosotros presentando esta información hoy. We want to welcome all of you for joining us and for, you know, just being participants throughout all of these months. We would also like to welcome our IPRE Center directors, our Acacia staff. And we have Angel Santini. Angel, I don't know would you like to say a few words before Dr. Rosa starts his presentation?
No, buenos días a todos y Como siempre, hoy viernes, de parte de Acacia Network y del Instituto Puertorriqueño Hispano para Personas Mayores, pues como menciona Gabriela, pues le damos la bienvenida. Recuerden que siempre tenemos estas presentaciones todos los lunes, miércoles y viernes. So welcome everyone, and remember that we have all this presentation, the virtual presentation every Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 11 o'clock. Y hoy pues tenemos esta presentación tan importante para aclarar muchas dudas sobre el COVID-19 y lo que es, ¿verdad?, el vaccine sobre COVID-19. Yo sé que muchos seniors tienen muchas dudas. So, Dr. Rosa.
All right, so before we start though, I do want to just set up a few rules. Dr. Rosa is going to be presenting for 20, 30 minutes. And right after the presentation, there will be an opportunity for you all to ask questions. We ask that you please hold off on your questions until the very end. Please don't unmute yourselves to ask questions so that Dr. Rosa can share the information. If you do have questions during the presentation, you can use the chat function. So if you know how to use the chat function, just drop in your question there, and I'll be monitoring those questions, and I'll ask them at the very end. And then when Dr. Rosa is done with this presentation, we'll be asking all of those questions. So again, if you have any questions, use the chat during the presentation, and we'll get to that. Antes de comenzar la presentación, queremos pedirles que por favor, si tienen alguna pregunta durante la presentación, utilicen la función del chat. Vayan allí a donde pueden escribir sus preguntas y nosotros vamos a estar recibiendo esas preguntas y se las vamos a hacer al doctor al final. Queremos darle la oportunidad al doctor de que haga su presentación completa y entonces al final vamos a tener la sesión de preguntas y respuestas. So with that said, we are now ready to hear what Dr. Rosa has to say. Dr. Rosa. Oh, you're on mute, Dr. Rosa.
Okay, thank you very much for this opportunity to address a very important subsection of our population. Hispanos y también no hispanos. Gracias por esta oportunidad para hacer una presentación breve para la situación de COVID y todos los otros problemas sanitarios. We certainly have seen at this point that we are seeing a surge of an illness that, quite frankly, was unknown to us. Let's say, for instance, a little over a year ago. We certainly have been inundated with viruses during the course of our lifetimes, but in December and into January, over on the other side of the world, really in China, there was an outbreak of a strange illness. It was associated with fever and with severe shortness of breath. And frankly, there was a lot of pneumonia going on. And quite a number of people were succumbing to this. They were dying out in China. And then very, very quickly, almost like a forest fire, it started making its rounds from China into Europe. And before long, in January, we started seeing some cases here. It was first even established to be something called a coronavirus. Now, coronavirus has been very well known to all of us. It was the cause of the common cold, which everybody has had, and we never needed a vaccine for it. And then very, very quickly, we found out that it was a new strain of the coronavirus. Now, the problem with the coronavirus is that this particular strain, we didn't have an immunity to it. We weren't protected to it. so that the body was giving us was basically reacting to it in very unusual ways. And the fact is that it was deadly. I mean, very, very deadly, especially in the subset of populations, the elderly population. Anybody over the age of 65 and over seem to have necessarily, if they caught this virus, very severe outcomes. And there were quite a number of deaths. It first showed up in Seattle, and then very, very quickly it came to our shores. And we really didn't have much of an explanation, and we didn't know how to protect ourselves. Estaba diciendo que el año pasado necesariamente nosotros no sabíamos de esta infección. Esta infección antes de diciembre del año pasado no había ningunos casos de lo que nosotros sabíamos. Y entonces, en diciembre y entrando a enero de este año pasado, parece que en la otra parte del mundo, que era en China, había muchos casos y estaba causando muchas muertes. Y eventualmente se desarrolló y también empezó a infectar muchas personas en Europa. Y eventualmente en enero ya esa infección, que era muy severa, llegó aquí en Seattle, Washington, en la otra parte del país. Y en febrero, los primeros casos aquí en Nueva York. Y es una infección que ellos identificaron como corona. Pero entonces nosotros siempre sabíamos que había corona porque causaba el catarro. Pero este era un poquito diferente, bastante diferente, que estaba causando problemas y muertes, especialmente respiratorios, y a las personas tenían infecciones muy severas, especialmente las personas que tenían más de 65 años. So, what eventually we found out was that it was the coronavirus. And all of a sudden, the government's response, and we're not talking about just our government, it was pretty much a global sensation. It was called a pandemic in mid-March, I think it was, that they established that it was a pandemic, meaning that the entire world population was not just at risk, but affected by this particular virus. And we had no real treatment for it. I mean, it was basically something that was very, very scary. Everyone was at risk because nobody had ever been exposed to this. So, myself as an emergency physician, certainly some of the first recommendations, which are still the recommendations, are basically to wash your hands. Don't touch your face. And this is scary because we didn't have any treatments, and keep a safe distance, and basically to wear face coverings. Primeramente, cuando nosotros nos establecimos que era una enfermedad nueva, lo único que nosotros podíamos ofrecer era lavarse las manos, usar algo para tapar la cara y la nariz, y la distancia, and basically social distancing. So, and these are still the regulations that are in place. So, since there were no treatments available at that time, and still up until this time, we really don't have medications that are necessarily effective, and certainly not curative. It doesn't cure the virus. It doesn't eliminate the virus. The virus has continued to proliferate. But what we do know at this point is that this particular virus loves basically people being close together, what we call mass gatherings. And because it makes it so much easier for this virus to proliferate. Lo que sí sabemos de este virus es que sí, este virus le encanta una cosa, que es que las personas se junten de una manera que la distancia sea mucho menos de 3 pies para la infección correrse de persona en persona. And basically the driver at a certain point I still remember, because I'm as Gabriel mentioned, I'm an emergency physician. I was working in high density areas in which there were certain things that I had never seen before, which was that people were dying at such a fast rate that we couldn't basically keep them in the morgue. We ran out of space in the morgue. So we basically had to get refrigerators outside of the emergency department to store all of the deceased. Now, this is something that was total. I've been in the business for over 25 years in the emergency department. I had never seen that before. And it was very, very scary because I was seeing colleagues and transporters and respiratory techs and people not necessarily 65 and over. There were people, there were younger people, 50s and 45-year-olds, and even 40-year-olds, even people younger than that. Who were falling, and there were definitely a lot of people who not necessarily were dying, but they were getting severely ill and needed to get respiratory assistance, something that we call intubations, in which I put a tube into a person's mouth, into the lungs, to basically breathe for them artificially. Lo que estaba diciendo es que cuando llegó, especialmente aquí en Nueva York, y estaba establecido en Nueva York. En la última parte de marzo, entrando a abril, nosotros estábamos entubando tantos pacientes y se estaban muriendo tantas personas, no necesariamente personas que eran todos de 65 y más. Había muchas personas que también eran más jóvenes, 50 y 40 años. Pero yo que he estado trabajando en la sala de emergencia como attending, doctor superior, estaba viendo neveras, troces de neveras, porque la parte donde nosotros teníamos el morgue, que era donde nosotros ponemos las personas cuando ellos pasan, ya estaba lleno. Estaban poniendo los cadáveres en los troces de refrigeration. Era una cosa que yo nunca había visto antes. Gracias a Dios, ya entrando un poquito en el verano, in the summer months, things started to calm down, at least here in New York and around the country. But recently we have seen and driven much by the holidays, Thanksgiving going into Christmas and certainly into New Year's. We're seeing unprecedented numbers of people who are dying, not necessarily here in New York or even in the Northeast. Many of these numbers are being driven by enormous death tolls in the Midwest and certain California, Florida, Texas. And I think that yesterday we again smashed another record. We lost 4,400 people to this virus. So again, this virus is still very, very, very dangerous. Now, finally, since we don't have a cure, and we still don't have a cure, estaba diciendo yo que en el verano, gracias a Dios, los números de personas que estaban muriéndose y afectados por este virus empezó a bajar y a bajar significante. Pero naturalmente ahora que entró el invierno, sí, también otra vez, que ya las personas no están afuera tanto y están dentro de las habitaciones un poquito más congregadas, y especialmente con las fiestas de Thanksgiving y las Navidades, el Año Nuevo, estamos viendo una cosa que otra vez nosotros teníamos miedo que esto iba a pasar, pero anticipando. Pero ahora los números están escalando a un punto que nosotros es increíble. Ayer mismo en el país, en nuestro país, perdimos más de 4,400 personas. Now, to put it in perspective, let's put this in perspective. We're approaching 400,000 since the beginning of the pandemic here that arrived in the United States. And by the way, the United States is the #1 driver of the numbers around the whole world, to be perfectly honest, as far as deaths are concerned and severe illness related to this. We are approaching 400,000 people, and probably before it's all over, we'll see 500,000. 400,000 people dying of this disease is actually, just to put it in perspective, is the population of Tampa, Florida. Now, think about that. The entire population of Tampa, Florida, wiped out. We're talking about the country, of course, 400,000 people who have died of this. Again, driven by what? People who have vulnerabilities, people who have diabetes, cancer, who have high blood pressure, heart disease, and people who are over the age of 65. So luckily, and not luckily, fortuitously, this past December, in the middle of December, we were able to finally get emergency use authorization for not just one, but two vaccines. One made by Pfizer, which is an American company, which is basically affiliated with BioNTech, which is a German company, and Moderna, which is an American company. And we got emergency use authorization for basically what is a vaccine that both are supposed to be 95% effective. 95% effective. Now, mind you, the greatest, that was an amazing news to all of us, because when we first started the trials in February and into March and April, we didn't know how effective this thing was going to work at all. But the fact is that 95% effectiveness is remarkable. It's almost 100%. So it's a very effective vaccine with very, very, very few side effects. I myself, as an emergency physician, I have completed the series of the Pfizer vaccine. I was first vaccinated when it was first dished out in that first week. The ICU doctors and the emergency doctors and nurses and frontline people were the first ones to be accepted and prioritized to get this vaccine. Lo que estaba diciendo es que gracias a Dios en el medio de el mes de diciembre, ahora que en este año que acaba de pasar, aceptaron para el uso de emergencia dos vacunas. Una es de Pfizer, que es una compañía americana que está congregada con una compañía BioNTech de Alemania, y también otra vacuna que es semejante de Moderna, una semana después de eso. Y yo personalmente ya completé la serie de vacuna de la Pfizer. A mí me dieron la primera inyección en la primera semana y una semana atrás me dieron la segunda. Yo, gracias a Dios, no sufrí ningún mala reacción de ninguna clase. Me dio un poquito de dolor del brazo ese día y no me dio fiebre, no me dio dolor de cuerpo, no me dio ningún efecto secundario. As I was saying in Spanish, I didn't have any side effects from the vaccine. I had a little bit of discomfort in the arm, but I didn't have any fever, any chills, any shaking, muscle aches, or any kind of body aches. Now, hopefully, that is the norm, and that's according to a lot of the data that we're collecting at this point. That's basically what it does cause. The side effects that we're anticipating with almost anyone. If you're going to have 5% of the people will have either a headache, they would have sort of like a fatigue and soreness of the arm, certainly, and muscle aches for a day or two, almost as if you did have a little mild cold or a flu. But this is pretty much it. Now, there is one population of people who have who have a history of allergic reactions they have reacted to it. That's 1 in 1 million. That's what we have calculated thus far. So at this point, it's important for us to consider if you're over the age of 65, the regulations are being the way it's being rolled out, which I don't want to tell you how pathetic the rollout has been. It hasn't been necessarily organized. But just to give you an example, the Health and the health commissioner, Secretary of Health of the United States, was hoping that by the end of December that we would have 20 million people vaccinated. About less than 1 million people were actually vaccinated during the course of time. So the rollout has been very, very slow and disappointing, to say the least. Estaba diciendo que la vacuna que está, dijeron primero que debe de ser personas más de 75. Primero necesariamente fueron los doctores que trabajan en las salas de emergencia y en las unidades intensivas. Pero entonces dijeron que la persona después de 75 años de edad, que es muy apropiado. Y ahora, este lunes, dijeron que las personas que tengan 65 años y más mayores de 65 años deben de pensar y ser elegibles para coger la vacuna también. Pero mis recomendaciones es para cualquier persona que tenga más de 65 años, por favor, recomiendo muy, muy importante que piensen muy no tengan dudas que la enfermedad es muy seria para ciertas personas, especialmente después de la edad de 65 años, los que tienen cáncer, han tenido cáncer, los que tienen alta presión, tienen diabetes, tienen otros problemas, también la gente que fuman cigarrillos. Recomiendo que piensen muy, muy fijo de tomar la vacuna, sin miedo, por favor. And my recommendations, of course, would be highly, highly recommended for those of you who are vulnerable over the age of 65 to take advantage of the opportunity to sign up. Just because you say to yourself, oh, I think I'll get the vaccine, doesn't necessarily mean that you will get the vaccine that day. As a matter of fact, it's doubtful that you will get the vaccine that day because the demand is actually surging way over the availability of the vaccine. And now I'll open it up to questions if anybody has any, and I'll expand on my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rosa, for sharing your expertise and your guidance. To everyone who joined us a little later during the presentation, we've been joined today by Dr. Daniel Rosa, who's a Senior Medical Director at Acacia Network and who also works as an emergency physician. Dr. Rosa gave us a lot of important background on the COVID-19 pandemic and some of the important health guidelines to keep in mind as we continue to battle the pandemic, especially now that the vaccine is with us. So again, thanks, Dr. Rosa. We do have a few questions that came in. The first one is, can I choose the vaccine that I get? Can I choose which type of vaccine, whether it's Moderna or Pfizer? That's the first question.
It's a wonderful question, actually. According to the CDC guidelines, the vaccines are the two vaccines that are available are equally effective. And as it turns out, what I would recommend is that whatever's offered to you, take it. The Pfizer vaccine is a little bit more. It's a little bit more difficult to get because it's usually a hospital-based vaccine, meaning that it has to be stored in a special freezer as opposed to the Moderna vaccine, which basically is the one that many of the people are being offered, simply because it's easier for it to store in a regular freezer. So unless you're in a hospital and you can afford those ultra cold freezers, chances are that you will probably not be offered the Pfizer vaccine. You will probably be offered the Moderna vaccine, which is just as effective. But my recommendations are that whatever vaccine is offered and available, use it, take it. Okay, you need the protection. That first shot is actually that first shot of the vaccine will bring, within a couple of days to certainly a week or two, will bring your defenses up to about 50 to 60%. It's the second shot, okay, that actually brings you up to the nearly 100% of efficacy that we have seen. estaba diciendo que en el caso de la persona que le ofrecen el Pfizer o le ofrecen la inyección de la Moderna, que es lo más posible que la Moderna es la que te van a ofrecer, porque la de Pfizer tiene que ser frisado en una nevera que el hospital tiene que ordenarla, porque es bien, 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 bien frío, comparativamente con el freezer que se puede mantener la Moderna. Pero lo que yo recomiendo es que si te ofrecen una vacuna, por favor, escoge esa. No piense de una. Y, by the way, they're not interchangeable. You can't necessarily get a Pfizer vaccine first and then go 20 something days later and get a Moderna vaccine. That actually is not the case, simply because the Pfizer vaccine, the second shot is to be given 21 days later, which is 3 weeks later, as opposed to Moderna shot. That one is given 28 days later. That's the recommendations, which is 4 weeks or a month. So though they utilize the same technology, they are slightly different virus vaccines.
Great, thank you, Dr. Rosa. And we have a few more questions. They're all great. Great questions are coming in. Tenemos muchas preguntas que están entrando. Próxima pregunta. One of our participants is asking if there's anything specific that they need to do before they get the vaccine. Do they need to, for example, not eat? Can they take their medication? If they take blood pressure medication or vitamins or aspirin, can they, is there anything special that they need to do or avoid? Voy a hacer la pregunta en español también. Tenemos un participante que está preguntando si tiene que hacer algo especial antes de tomar la vacuna, si hay algo que tiene que evitar o si se puede tomar sus medicamentos. So, Dr. Rosa, any thoughts on that? Any recommendations?
Yes, no. When you're ready to, you can eat your breakfast, you can take your medications, you can do your normal routine and show up and get your vaccine. No hay que hacer ninguna preparaciones, cómense su desayuno, tómense su cafeíto y cojan sus medicinas y cuando te llegue el turno, coge su vacuna.
Excellent. Also, we have some participants wondering how long they have to continue to use the mask after the second vaccine. Tenemos un participante que quiere saber por cuánto tiempo va a tener que seguir utilizando la máscara después de haber completado su dosis de vacuna.
At this point, it's still, we have to wear our masks indefinitely until, and it's a wonderful question, as a matter of fact, because you have to remember what the vaccine does. The vaccine protects you from getting ill. We haven't necessarily established that the vaccine will keep you from getting infected. Now, I want to kind of like detail that a little bit. Lo que yo dije es que la máscara es necesario mantenerla y seguir usando la máscara porque la vacuna te protege a la persona que recibió la vacuna de enfermarse por 95%, quizás hasta 100%. So, la persona que se vacuna, lo más posible que no se va a enfermar, pero sí todavía puede ser infectado. Now, what I want to say about that is that you may actually harbor the virus in your nose, okay, or in your mouth. And you can still theoretically pass it on. We don't know that for sure, but you can certainly still have a positive test afterwards. It's just that you will not get sick. But is it possible that since you do have a positive test and there is virus in your nose or in your mouth, that you may be able to give it to someone else who hasn't been vaccinated, and that the kind of vector, okay, is dangerous as a public health concern? But lo que estaba diciendo es que aunque una persona no se enferme cuando están vacunados, pero es posible que puedan tener la infección dentro de la nariz o dentro de la garganta y dárselo a otra persona. So, para nosotros evitar eso, necesitamos todavía usar la máscara. Very good question. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Rosa. So there's a couple of questions coming in about patients who may be allergic to certain medications. For example, patients who might be allergic to penicillin, patients who have pre-existing conditions like diabetes. Can people who have allergies to other medications like penicillin take the vaccine? And what about people with pre-existing conditions? Do they need to have any concerns?
No, actually, the concern that they should have is not getting the vaccine, because you're at high risk for severe disease if you get the infection. There's nothing guaranteed. I mean, the fact is that if you get the infection, I've had people who are 80 years old who have diabetes, who have had cancer, have heart disease, open heart surgery. And when I tell them that their antibody, which means that they were infected, was positive, okay, they can't believe it. They said, I didn't get sick. So the worst part about this particular virus is that we cannot tell you. We could give you statistics that say that yes, you are more at risk, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to die of or even get sick from the virus if you get it. But we certainly have enough evidence at this point to establish that those who do have diabetes, who are over the age of 70, 65, 70, 75 and over, that people who have those pre-existing conditions are the priority, and those are the people that we should be actually focused on to vaccinate first. Estaba diciendo que sin duda esa es la pregunta fue que si la persona tiene problemas como diabetes, ha tenido problemas, son mayores de edad, que si esa persona han tenido alergias a penicilina o cualquier cosa, que si deben de evitar la vacuna. No, deben de evitarla. Esas son personas que más son necesariamente el foco de nosotros dar la vacuna. Esas son las personas que están bien a riesgo de tener una enfermedad severa de este virus. So, si han tenido alergias a la penicilina, entonces te doy la vacuna. Si te da una reacción pequeña o lo que sea, te doy Benadryl, te doy prednisona o algo, y entonces está vacunado. No one should have any trepidation about having the vaccine if they have a history of an allergy to an antibiotic or any other medication.
Excellent. Thank you, doctor. And we have another interesting question coming in. And well, for those of you who don't know, Dr. Rosa is also a specialist in addiction. So this question is right up your alley, Dr. Rosa. Someone is asking, can clients get the vaccine while they are actively using illicit drugs and alcohol, and like cocaine, heroin, marijuana, alcohol, and other street drugs?
The answer in a nutshell is yes. La pregunta era que si las personas que están usando marihuana han tenido problemas con el uso de drogas, alcohol, si ellos deben de tener precauciones. No, por favor, ellos son las personas y las personas, especialmente las personas que fuman cigarrillos, deben de ser prioridades de tomar la vacuna, porque la enfermedad del virus de corona lo afecta, o es posible que lo puedan afectar mucho peor a ellos, y ellos deben de ser vacunados con prioridad, naturalmente.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Rosa. Let's see. Another question that came in over here is, if you take the vaccine now, and I guess this goes, there's so many unknowns, but the question is, if you take the vaccine now, will you have to take it again next year? La pregunta es, si alguien recibe la vacuna ahora, ¿va a tener que recibirla el año que viene?
That's a wonderful question. We don't know at this point when we were going to necessarily need a booster. there's a good possibility that we probably will need a booster at some point. But exactly the time constraints and we certainly know that it's suggested that the antibodies are still very much protective even after 8 months or so. But since it's a brand new vaccine, and even the trials of these particular both the vaccines that are available now have not been tested for over a year at this point, we don't know exactly when we need a booster. There's a possibility, a very good possibility, that we will need a booster. La contesta es que para las personas que cogieron la primera inyección, a serie de inyecciones, que cuando si es necesario coger la vacuna en el futuro, como hacemos con el flu y eso, es posible, sí, muy posible, pero no sabemos exactamente la duración de protección de esta vacuna. Es una vacuna bastante nueva y la gente que se sometieron a los trials antes de que dieron la autorización para el uso, todavía no va más de un año. Aparentemente, los estudios están sugiriendo que la protección dura más de 8 meses, pero no sabemos si en años en el futuro necesitamos coger otra vacuna para protegernos cuando los anticuerpos o la protección empieza a bajar. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Rosa. One more. So we've all heard about the new strains, right? How the virus is constantly mutating, and you know what they call the UK strain versus the South African strain, etc. Do we know whether these vaccines are currently protecting against these other strains? La pregunta es, hemos muchos leído en las noticias acerca de estas otras variantes del virus y queremos saber si esta vacuna es efectiva contra las nuevas variantes del virus que salen.
We certainly hope so. It seems like the good thing about the new strains, which are very troubling, but not necessarily surprising, is that viruses basically changing their makeup, if you can, all the time, and this particular virus is no exception. The virus appears to be not more severe. It doesn't cause more severe disease, but it appears to be more contagious. The early reports are that the new strains are susceptible to the vaccines, and that when we get vaccinated for the older strain, that it actually protects us versus the new strain too, because apparently the spike protein, which is the protein that our immune system is defending us against, and that allows the virus to get into our cells, it utilizes the same spike protein. So lo que estaba diciendo que es que sí, parece que la vacuna que estamos empleando ahora nos protegen también contra la nueva virus que está saliendo, que es parte de la corona. Y a nosotros era casi, nosotros esperábamos que el virus siga cambiando de una manera u otra. Este virus parece que no causa problemas más serios, pero sí parece que es más infectiva, pasa de persona a persona mucho más fácil. So, aparentemente las dos vacunas que estamos empleando ahora, que estamos dando, sí nos protegen a nosotros contra el nuevo virus. Gracias a Dios a este punto. But they're doing a lot more research on that right now.
Great, thank you, Dr. Rosa. Another question coming in regarding the timeline for there being a COVID-19 vaccine for children. La pregunta es si tenemos información acerca de la vacuna para niños.
Yeah, it's the same. It's the same two vaccines, and remember that there are two other vaccines that are just about to be that are hopefully just about to be recommended and hopefully approved for emergency use authorization also. One of them is from AstraZeneca, which is already being administered out in England, in Europe, and Johnson & Johnson and Janssen have combined to put out another vaccine also. So there's going to be a number of vaccines that are available, hopefully in the spring and in the summer, that will help us to combat this particular pandemic. But at this point, yeah, I would say that. Oh my God, Gabriela, what was the question again? One more time.
Children. When do
Oh,
we expect it to be rolled out for
it's the
kids?
same. Yeah, it's the same vaccines though, and the new trials that are being conducted now are from 12 to 18. Pfizer and both Moderna are doing some early trials on children. And it's important because that's a population that, although they don't necessarily get sick, they're considered to be the transmitters of much of and drivers of a lot of the disease that's going on now. Estaba diciendo yo que para los niños va a ser la misma dos vacunas naturalmente, y tenemos dos vacunas que están que están investigando ahora para que una es de Johnson Johnson y la otra de AstraZeneca. So, si Dios quiere, quizás ya antes del verano podemos añadir dos vacunas más de dos otras compañías que nos deja nosotros seleccionar y tener mucho más defensas contra esta pandemia. Pero la vacuna, están haciendo ahora investigaciones, la Pfizer y la Moderna para los niños que tengan de 12 a 18 años, para ver si es igualmente efectiva. Yo creo que va a salir que son muy efectivas, y es muy importante porque los niños sí crean, cuando tienen el virus, no necesariamente se enferman, pero sí se lo pueden dar a los otros que somos más mayores. So, es una población muy importante, pero también enfocar.
Great, thank you, doctor. And speaking of which, you just mentioned these vaccines that are currently up for potential approval sometime in the near future, the Oxford AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson/Janssen vaccine. In your opinion, given that the Moderna one and the Pfizer one are quote unquote a new mRNA technology versus the more traditional vaccine technology that's being used in the Oxford and Johnson & Johnson cases, would you say any of these are quote unquote a safer route of vaccination with less potential for long-term impact, or even when we think of children or other vulnerable populations?
No, yeah, I think that the safety profiles are some of the first things that are basically established during any trials, and every single vaccine that has been that is currently being evaluated, and those certainly that have been released for emergency use authorization appear to be incredibly safe. And let's say, for instance, when you're thinking about the benefits and the benefits of the vaccine versus actually getting the dreaded virus, I think that that's a no-brainer. You basically want a safe vaccine. I think that and especially now, there are millions and millions of people are actually getting the vaccine worldwide, that we have established that to a certain extent, at least over the past year or so, that we're dealing with a very safe vaccine. Usually some of the the majority of the adverse effects that you see with vaccinations, and this is globally and historically, have been within the first few weeks of vaccination. And certainly nothing, further, much further out. So I think that we're dealing with, even though it appears to be new technology, this mRNA technology is not new at all. This mRNA technology has been worked on for the past 30 years. And we certainly have established that it seems to be very, very safe. The more traditional and conventional vaccines, certainly those vaccines utilizing more conventional have, historically been very, very safe and very beneficial. That's the most important thing. Is it better to get the vaccine than not get the vaccine? And overwhelmingly, yeah, you would say yes. Las vacunas, aunque son un poquito diferentes, todo tienen la prioridad de uno sentirse cómodo, que no te va a causar más efectos malos que beneficios. Y todas las vacunas a este punto, siempre si se ven problemas con cualquier vacuna, históricamente los efectos secundarios han sido durante las primeras 2 o 3 o 4 semanas. Nosotros ya tenemos tanta información, ya millones de personas han recibido, no nada más aquí, pero en el mundo entero, las 2 vacunas que nosotros estamos utilizando de emergencia, la Pfizer y la Moderna, que están usando una tecnología nueva. Pero no es tan nueva, esta tecnología ya lleva más de 30 años que están las personas estableciendo que si son, if they're safe or not. Y entonces ya sabemos que parece que el virus es muy, muy peligroso. La vacuna parece que no tiene pues muchos problemas, no tiene ninguno problemas de lo que veo yo. Y sin duda no hemos visto ni una muerte secundaria a la vacuna. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Dr. Rosa. And since we're almost at the 12 p.m. mark, and we know Dr. Rosa has patience, we are going to start wrapping it up. I will, there's a few more questions. For example, somebody asked about the risk to cigarette smokers of there being an adverse reaction to the vaccine. No, in fact, it is, Dr. Rosa stated earlier that smokers should be at the top of the line to get the vaccine. It is recommended that people who smoke cigarettes get the vaccine. Se recomienda que las personas que fuman cigarrillos reciban la vacuna porque están en mayor riesgo de COVID-19. There's another question regarding whether people need to, if it's true that people need to get the same type of vaccine for the 2 doses. And the answer is yes. And they're asking why, Dr. Rosa. ¿Por qué las personas tienen que recibir la misma? Si es la de Pfizer, la misma Pfizer 2 veces, la misma Moderna 2 veces.
It's a good question, actually. Let me show you. Once you get vaccinated once, you get a card. This card is almost as important as a voter registration card. It's almost as important as your driver's license. This is almost as important as almost any card or any kind of identification that you could possibly have. This is mine. Basically, it tells that I received the Pfizer vaccine, that the date that I received the Pfizer vaccine, and the follow-up date that I got the Pfizer vaccine. Now, the number one reason, of course, is that chances are that no one is going to accept you to get first an initial dose of a Pfizer vaccine and then come back to get a Moderna vaccine, because at a certain point after you get the first vaccine, these particular vaccines are they're basically followed by a database that's kept by the CDC, which is at the federal level, and also at the state level, so that they give you a return date to get the second vaccine. And hopefully the second vaccine will be available, because at this point we're in a little bit of and I'm not going to get into that, but we're in a little bit of a quandary as to whether to really, a lot of the vaccines were, my apologies. A lot of the vaccines during the rollout were designated, and some vaccines were being held back to make sure that that we had enough vaccine to give to a second dose to the folks. They're going to open that up now, and we'll see how that works out. But you get a return date. Remember, the Pfizer vaccine is given the second dose is given 21 days later, and the Moderna vaccine is given 28 days later. So again, the technology, although it basically utilizes the same mRNA technology, the vaccines are slightly different, and they are not interchangeable. Las dos vacunas son casi usan la misma tecnología, pero no son idénticas. Y le estaba enseñando mi tarjetita. La tarjetita te dice cuándo uno tiene que regresar para recibir la segunda vacuna. Uno no puede usar una y entonces usar la otra porque si uno te dan inicialmente la de Pfizer, tiene que venir 21 días después de la primera inyección para darte la segunda. La Moderna tiene que ser 28 días. No se pueden intercambiar.
Wonderful, thanks. And two very quick questions before we wrap it up. A couple of people have asked about the possibilities to have children after the vaccine. Alguien quiere saber si recibir la vacuna de alguna manera impacta su posibilidad de tener hijos, getting pregnant after the vaccine. Is it possible to have kids?
Wow, I never heard that one before. That's a good one. Yes, you can have children afterwards. And it shouldn't interfere with the ability to conceive, and it's a vaccine. It basically creates an antibody that defends you against a specific target, which is the coronavirus. It doesn't affect any other part of your body. La vacuna está enfocada necesariamente para combatir y protegerte contra la corona. No te afecta la posibilidad de caer embarazada o necesariamente ninguna otra funciones de su cuerpo. That's a great question. I like that.
Thank you. And then for people, this is one more question about just eligibility, people who can get the vaccine given certain conditions. So for example, somebody who may have had cancer but is no longer being treated, somebody with heart failure, and finally, someone who may have already had COVID-19. Are all of these individuals eligible for the vaccine, or should some of them not get the vaccine? So la pregunta es, para ciertos individuos que pueden haber tenido ciertas condiciones, como una persona que tuvo cáncer, o una persona que tiene fallo cardíaco, o una persona que tuvo COVID-19 en el pasado, ¿todas estas personas pueden recibir la vacuna o hay algunos que no deben recibir la vacuna?
No, a este punto yo no veo casi ninguna excepción de personas que no deben de recibir la vacuna. Para personas que pero es una pregunta perfecta para terminar esta conversación, porque sí, las personas que han tenido el virus y todavía tienen anticuerpos, sí, deben de vacunarse naturalmente cuando le llegue su turno, pero gracias a Dios esa persona todavía deben de tener defensas. Y también ahora, pero no, las defensas de tener la infección naturalmente no llega al mismo nivel de la vacuna. La vacuna aparentemente te da mucho más protección que mira qué cosa, que coger la infección naturalmente, porque los anticuerpos entonces empiezan más rápido a desaparecerse en la persona que han tenido la infección naturalmente. So, la vacuna es muy importante. I was saying that by getting a natural infection, fortunately, you do have a natural protection in antibodies, but that antibody response, and diminishes, it would appear, quicker than getting the vaccine. The vaccine gives you a more robust defense, neutralizing antibody defense than does natural infection. It's almost counterintuitive when you think about it, but that's just the way it is. So yes, anyone who has pre-existing conditions and people who have even had the infection naturally, unless they just recover from the infection within a month or two. I mean within several weeks to a month. They should probably hold off on getting the vaccine until basically several months then thereafter. But if you have had a distant exposure more than several months, yeah, you really should consider getting vaccinated as a priority when your time comes up.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Rosa. So the bottom line to everyone here today is please consider making an appointment, whether you have pre-existing conditions, whether you've had COVID-19 in the past. Dr. Rosa confirmed that there's hardly any reason why individuals should not consider getting vaccinated. So far, in his experience, there have been hardly any side effects, as he said, and the majority of side effects that people have experienced have been pain at the injection site. So we do encourage you to contact us at Acacia Network to make your appointment. We have a special hotline for seniors that you can call and make an appointment to get your vaccine. Ahora en español. Gracias al Dr. Rosa por unirse a este panel hoy y darnos toda esta información importante. En las palabras del Dr. Rosa, no importa si usted tiene condiciones preexistentes, cualquier condición que pueda ser, diabetes, condiciones cardíacas, si ha tenido COVID-19 en el pasado, todo el mundo debería considerar ponerse la vacuna. Se ha probado que es una vacuna efectiva y que es segura. Si usted tiene alguna duda, le puede preguntar a su proveedor médico, pero al momento la recomendación clínica es que todo el mundo que es elegible se ponga la vacuna. Y ahora mismo Acacia Network está vacunando a todos los individuos elegibles, incluyendo seniors mayores de la edad de 65. Y tenemos una línea telefónica especial para que los seniors llamen a hacer su cita. So the number to make an appointment with Acacia Network for your vaccine is 718-734-2539. Again, for those of you who want to make an appointment, the number is 718-734-2539. Para todos ustedes que quieran hacer una cita con nosotros para su vacuna, llámenos al 718-734-2539. 718-734-2539. Again, we want to thank you all for joining us today. We want to thank IPRE, Acacia Network, and of course, Dr. Rosa for his expert guidance. Gracias a todos. Esperamos que tengan un lindo día. Thank you for joining us. Please stay tuned for presentations next week. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. There was a question here about this opportunity for staff who reside in New York only. Please call us to inquire about making an appointment or visit us online. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good day. Gracias a todos. Buen día.
Thank you.
Thank you.